Hello, guys. Thank you for being here for our live stream of Read a Book with Kara to talk about September's book, Winter Counts. I'm so excited. We're joined right now by the actual literal author of the book, David Heska, Wanbli, Weiden. I'm so sorry. Oh my God, we just said it. We just did it.
Right.
And then comedian, writer, funny Twitter person, which, I feel like we need to mention it. Joey Clift. Thank
Hey,
you
everybody.
for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about David's book. There he is. It's flipped. Got it.
We were just doing a brief sort of, talking about how much everyone likes each other, which which we'll save you from. But I just off the top, like, David, congratulations. The book is so good, and just, I think we were talking about, having like good news happen during COVID. But my first question for you is just, I think it's such a like fast-paced thriller, like fun page-turnery book. And so I just wanted to ask you about what it was like writing, all of those elements of the book, but you also weave a lot of really heavy and serious and important issues in, and just what that was like in your brain balancing all those things.
Well, first of all, hey, everybody, it's great to be here. And thanks to these two great people for having me. It's just, the book has been out just over a month, and I'm thrilled. Today, the book was reviewed positively in the New York Times, the print version. I know that's like a dream for a writer. So thank you, all readers, all viewers, and thanks to you guys. So what was it like to write the book? I was kind of doing a balancing act. I wanted it to be entertaining. I wanted it to be thrilling. I wanted it to be scary. I wanted it to be funny. I wanted great comedians like Joey Clift to get, a chuckle out of it at points. But at the same time, I wanted the book to educate and to inform as well. But I had to sneak that in, okay? Because I didn't want it to be a textbook. I didn't want it to be a lecture. And so I tried to wrap in a lot of the issues: the broken criminal justice system on Native reservations, our broken healthcare system, the fact that we can't get decent food. I tried to wrap these in, but in a way that, you're kind of sucked into the story. So yeah, it was a balancing act.
I just want to say, mission accomplished. I wrote a couple of notes for this in the wellness relief center doctor, the white dude with dreads. I laughed out loud several times and had to reread that chapter. It's just so, like, I don't know. It's like, that is like when he told a bunch of natives like what native stuff means. It's like, I've been there. I know how that goes.
I had a question for you, Joey, but since you brought it up, because I have an issue with white people with dreads, just fundamentally. It's
a trope. It's a comedy trope. If you see white person with dreads, you're just like, oh, I kind of don't like that person already.
But I want to read that exchange. So our Virgil is at a marijuana dispensary. He talks to this white guy with dreads. And the guy asks, Virgil asks, you ever see a guy in here called Rick Crow, about 6 feet tall, long black hair, Indian guy? The dreadlock white guy responds, I believe you mean Native American. It's just like
that's a good joke. Good joke.
I have to feel like that was cathartic, and like, how many times has that happened to you?
I know, right? I mean, we don't, natives, look, I don't want to speak for all natives. There are almost 600 nations out there, and all of us have different traditions and customs, but at least my people, the Lakota, we don't call each other Native American. We natives, indigenous, Indians, Native American is sort of this academic term. So I kind of had to throw it in there. The white guy with dreads would be like, I believe you mean Native American, So, but that whole scene was fun to write, because in the earlier scene, he's ridiculously pompous earlier in that scene. I live in Colorado, and we have a little town called Boulder up here, which is filled with, very woke, spiritualized people. And so in that scene, the doctor has to talk about, how he utilizes Native American healing and all this. And, so the satire, that was one of the really fun scenes to write. Absolutely.
Well, Joey, can you talk about, just your initial response? Because you mentioned it to me briefly, and I really loved hearing you talk about it. Just like your first response to when you finished the book and reading the book.
Okay, so real quick, I wanted to reply to David's point, and I'll get to that really quick. Yeah, I feel like it's like I put Native American on stuff when I want to like shine a lantern on it so like everybody knows what I'm talking about. Because sometimes when you say native, people are just like, oh, like does that mean like native to Los Angeles or whatever? But like, yeah, I feel like native is what I use in shorthand. And like Indian is like, that's like, I feel like what used on the res more, but it's like, it is, yeah, I really responded to that and thought that was funny. To Kara's point, yeah, immediately upon finishing the book, I'm writing on a TV show right now, and I don't tell my boss this. I took my lunch breaks over the past week or two to read the book, and once I got to the final, I would say like 100 pages or so, I was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna like read this into the time I've dedicated to writing. I couldn't put it down. It was great, and you know, I think it's what I appreciated about it was how like just authentically native it was. You know, like I think Kara and I were talking over Twitter DM, and that like I'm native, I'm rural Cowlitz, and like oftentimes when I'm like asked to read scripts by non-natives and stories by non-natives, it's just like the characters are not humans. It's like I remember I was reading a character description of a character in a script that somebody sent me that was supposed to be like a badass, non-stereotypical native lady. And the first action line descriptor of her was that she drives her car stoically, which I was like, what does that mean? Is an eagle driving the car? Is flute music playing while she's driving? Yeah, it's that. It's staring out the window, not watching the road. I don't know. And you know, I really appreciated how like human everybody was, and how like every character was deeply native and deeply came from a native perspective, but also like they were just folks, you know. And I think that that's something that it's just refreshing to see. But real quick question I wanted to ask David. So I saw that you did a Bethany Yellowtail shout out. Marie referred to Bethany Yellowtail skirt, I believe. Bethany Yellowtail is like a genius native fashion designer who everybody should check out. I'm friends with her. Are you friends with her too? Do we know the same person? Was that a friend shout out or a fan shout out?
So, you know, we were talking a little bit before we started going live here. So my girlfriend is my partner is the native writer, Erica Worth. And so she turned me on to Bethany Yellowtail. So I buy her, you know, for special occasions, Bethany Yellowtail. And the stuff is just amazing and wonderful. And so Erica gave me a lot of the native fashion stuff that I put in there. So no, I don't know Bethany Yellowtail. I would like to. Hey, Bethany, give me a shout.
I'll send her an email after this. I'll send her an email after this and say like, hey, like a cool book gives you a shout out. But it's just the sort of thing where like, it's racist to assume that all professional natives off the res doing stuff off the res know each other, but like we all kind of know each other. Even just like you and I, like Erica Worth, that like and I follow each other on Twitter, and like it's I
feel like that's the same. I think it's the assumption like in Hollywood, like Joey, since we both, you know, like I don't like to, if someone mentions like a Black writer, I don't want to be like, obviously I know them, because I don't want them to think we do all know each other, but like obviously, you know, it's that kind of thing where it's like we know, but we don't want white people to know. We all know that.
Right. It's like it's racist to assume, but also like it's like it's like close knit community. It would be racist if somebody said like, "Hey, I'm friends with the guy on the Nez Pierce res. Are you friends with him?" And I'm like, I don't know. He's like a guy that works at a gas station.
Right.
If it's like, oh, this other writer or this other like creative, or it's like, yeah, I don't know. We're all in the same. We're all like 1 or 2 degrees away from being on the same text chain, you know?
Agreed.
I wanted to say something about this idea, like talking about stereotypes briefly, because you have Virgil and he's like this vigilante. And so the whole idea behind his work is that, you know, I mean, justice is hard to come by in general, but so frequently on the reservation, because the police on the reservation have basically no power, and it defaults to federal authorities who are useless and racist. And so he takes matters into his own hand, in particular when it comes to harm against women, children. And I think something I love about that is this idea of, you know, I think there's a book called Ghetto Side. It's really incredible. And it's about South Los Angeles, like sort of in, you know, 30 years ago. And this idea of people take vigilantism when the system fails them. And it's not because Black people are violent. It's because when any system fails anyone, that's what they turn to. And that's what I love about you know, it's when any human being is put in a situation where people that they care about, so in Virgil's case, you know, women and children who are vulnerable are being harmed and the system fails them, people take matters into their own hand. And it's not these specific groups, it's what human beings do. Yeah. And I loved the way that, in particular, because, I mean, we could spend this whole podcast talking about the ways in which Native women are failed, just on every possible level. But I don't know. I think if you could just speak to that a little bit, because I also was like, he's a hero. I was like, go beat that guy up. Fuck him.
Yeah. So, you know, the issue of being a vigilante was complicated. Okay. Because look, I don't condone vigilante justice in general, right? I mean, you know, off the res, you shouldn't get a gun and go shoot somebody because they walked on your lawn. Get off my lawn, you know, I'm going to shoot you, you know. I mean, I don't condone it. But the problem is the criminal justice system on most reservations is almost completely broken. So for those who haven't read the book, I'll very briefly explain. There's a federal law called the Major Crimes Act, which says that if a felony crime happens on reservations and tribal police arrest the wrongdoer, they can't prosecute it. They have to call the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they are supposed to prosecute it. But about 40% of the time, they are not prosecuting. They say, oh, we don't have enough evidence, or this doesn't meet our guidelines, and they let the person go free. And he's free then, we'll make it a he, you know, to go out and rape Native women again or hurt little kids. So people will call up these professional vigilantes to go and enact some justice, you know, off the grid, so to speak, some Indian justice. So I don't condone it, but on the other hand, I'm a father of two. If somebody hurt one of my kids and the feds wouldn't do anything, and I saw the guy walking around, I'd be tempted. In fact, I'd almost certainly be like, yeah, go get him, go get him. So it's complicated, and in the book I do have Virgil grapple with the morality of his profession, and there is a sequel to the book which I'm writing right now.
That's a question, by the way, that's been like popping up. Everyone was asking about a sequel, so they'll be very happy.
Oh yeah, I've written down a question of what does Virgil do for money after this book. So I'm and I'm not a spoiler, but so I am excited that there's a sequel.
Yeah. So yeah, I just to wrap this up. I mean, you know, vigilantism, it is a complicated issue, okay? And he grapples and he feels, am I doing the right thing? Because he starts to like the beatings too much. And he says, you know, I need to find a support group, but they're kind of hard to find for professional vigilantes, you know? And so, you know, it's a question. Hopefully the book works because there are no easy answers in the book. So I'll leave it there.
When to Kara's point, I think that something that I really loved about the book is like, you know, like Native people aren't a monolith. We're not all experts on every subject around Native stuff. I knew of these loopholes, and of course I know about the, you know, murdered and missing Indigenous women epidemic, but I didn't necessarily know the intricacies of it, of like, oh, like that explains why so many crimes happens on reservations, is that the federal government is just like, yeah, I don't know, maybe this crime is low on our priority list or whatever. And I think that the book did a really good job of like not just telling a great story, but also like explaining that stuff to people and why this exists. And it is just like a great narrative move to like see this loophole and then see like, oh, there are actual people that like kind of are a stopgap between, you know, like between justice, you know, between official justice organizations for people. And like, of course, a story should take place there. A series should take place there. There should be a movie in that world. It's like there's so much that you can do with that concept. So I just wanted to give props for doing the thing.
Well, thank you. And for those who are interested, look, you can't know everything about everything. That is something that I think all of us get. They assume that when you're a person of color that you know everything.
God. You know everything.
You know everything about every possible subtopic. Just yesterday, and it comes from a really good place. I'm not saying that these people are bad, but somebody's like, I need you to explain to me the difference between Blackfoot and Blackfeet. And I'm like, I don't know. Okay, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, really. But we can't know everything. For those, but this is something I do know about. In my day job, I'm a professor of Native American Studies. Okay, so I know a little bit about some of the laws and stuff. And in the author's note of the book, there are resources that people that want to learn more, they can look stuff up. And I also published an op-ed in the New York Times, July 19th of this year, where I talk about it in a serious scholarly way, you know, what's wrong with the Major Crimes Act. And I should note that I am using some of the proceeds from this book and I'm working with a Native legal rights organization, and we're trying to start a dialogue to get this unjust law overturned or amended so that Native women can no longer have to fear for their lives every time they leave the house on reservations. So I'm trying to use whatever small attention I get from this book to do some good. So
I love that. I thought that when I did read the author's notes and I saw you list the resources, like I was going to ask you about that, because again, like it is this default that if you are a person of color, you're like a well of knowledge of every possible of history. It's like, I don't know all history. You know what I mean? Like I think it's just this assumption, and like that I think also like, there are things I have an issue with, like this sort of movement on Twitter where people are like, listen to Black women. I'm like, not all of them. They don't all know what, you know what I mean? I'm like, guys, we should be listening to people, but like this,
don't put folks on a pedestal.
Yeah, exactly that. I understand. I'm an expert on my experience. Absolutely. But I'm not an expert on everything. And it's also why you should read books. Like, I know things because I read books and learn them, not because I was born, knowing these things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've started telling people when they ask me a specific Native question of a region that I don't know about to Google it. Because it's like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be like, I don't know, like, how do you make a dream catcher? I don't know. It's like we're like, it's like, also, I'm a comedy writer. Don't listen to me unless it's about jokes.
I mean, that is the thing. It's like they're asking, like, I'm like, I write jokes in television. Like, I know things, but like,
yeah.
I don't know why you're turning to me, guys.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about, the book, obviously, it deals with this influx of drugs, heroin specifically, coming onto the reservation. And one of the things that I really appreciated is that I feel like, I have a lot of issues with the way the opioid epidemic is sort of playing out. It's like all of a sudden there's a lot of compassion for drug addicts that was not there in the 80s when, all of a sudden, and it's because you have a lot of suburban white children, overdosing on drugs. So I think that epidemic is so frequently seen through a white lens. Like, there's a book called Dope Sick that I really enjoyed because it was, it's about white people suffering from this epidemic, and that, this element of the story recognizing that it's not just white people who this is affecting.
Yeah, so the book, again, for people who haven't read it, it takes place on the res, and the professional vigilante Virgil Wounded Horse is hired to stop heroin from being brought to the Rosebud Reservation from outside. Now, it's based again on real stuff. Okay, just as there are real vigilantes on reservations, there is in fact heroin that is starting to come onto a lot of reservations. Now, I relied upon the really wonderful book Dreamland by Sam Quinones, and it covers, it sounds like a lot. I'm aware of Dope Sick, but I haven't read it. But it covers a lot of the same ground. Dreamland talks about how the opioid big pharma companies really marketed these opioid drugs and got a lot of people, especially in the South and the Midwest, hooked on them. And then when the supply was cut, these people turned right to heroin because it's just a derivative of the same drug, morphine. And so now distribution is moving in a different model. And so I relied upon that book to provide the framework, because I knew almost nothing about this. But you're absolutely right that, now we have lots and lots of sympathy for addicts and such that was not there previously. So that's another running sub-theme of the book. The book is about the criminal justice system. It's also got a powerful anti-drug message. And the book is about identity. Virgil is what we call on my res an Heska. He's a half-breed. So, so there are a lot of running sub-themes, but the drug abuse one is absolutely one of them.
Yeah. I want to talk sort of like taking a step back, and Joey, maybe you can respond to this as people who are, like artists and creating things. Like, I think to me, the ideal, like when I would hear Toni Morrison speak about the extent to which she did not write for white people. And I think like, I definitely don't think that that's the audience I'm ever writing for, but it's always in the back of my mind. Like if you're telling a joke, or if you're something that's even like sort of for your people or about them or meant for them or whatever it is, like I still can't help but it even running through my mind of like how that is going to be perceived or like what that impact could be. And so I wonder if you could talk about, for you as a writer and a storyteller, you know, wanting to tell stories that are authentic to you and to your community and all of that. And just the struggle of also like having to do it within a system, you know, within a white system, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll pass this off to Joey in a minute because I think you have a lot more experience in the entertainment world than I do. I'm just now starting to talk with movie producers and production companies and all that, and you know, I've had a lot of different.
Getting a movie?
Well, you know, there's a long way to go.
It should be a movie. It should be. Who do I got to email in Hollywood? You want me to email the president of Hollywood? You want me to email Joe Hollywood? I'll do that. I'll make it happen.
I mean, it's so not my world, you know. But there are talks going on. That's really all I can say right now. But you know, so for storytellers and creatives, you know, especially creatives of color, there is this fine line. It's like, do we get very explainy and do we have to explain everything, or do we trust our readers or our viewers, our listeners, to kind of follow us? And so I had to walk a fine line. Sometimes I gave the bones of some explanation. Other times I said, look, you're just going to have to trust me and go with me. Now, the larger question of telling the story about my people in an authentic way and an honest way, I did make one strong decision, and that is I was not going to make Virgil an alcoholic. He's had a problem with substances in the past, but I chose he never takes a drink in the book. And as a writer, it's bad form to engage with reviews, you know, but I got one review and somebody said, well, Virgil is a raging alcoholic. No, he's not. He has defeated his, you know, he's struggling, he's tempted. There's a scene in there where he has a drink in front of him, but he pushes it aside. You know, and so I made the strong decision that I was not going to play into the stereotype of, you know, the drunk Indian. And so I made it, you know, again, just a very, very crucial part. I made that decision early on to show Virgil, you know, to be sober and struggling, you know, human, you know. So that was another decision that I made early on to tell my story authentically, but also positively.
Yeah, I want to say that I upon reading it, really appreciated that choice, and I definitely acknowledge it. I thought it was really good. I mean, I think it's like coming up through Hollywood, you know, just because there's not like, you know, there's a couple dozen natives in Hollywood that are doing some really good things, but like there's not necessarily like a native production company. I mean, there's a couple, but there's not like huge native production companies or big name native directors or like a native run network or anything like that. So ultimately, like whenever you're pitching any story, any place, there is definitely an idea of like, at some point, I'm going to have to explain this to a white executive. But I have been fortunate to work on a couple of projects with like all native writers' rooms. And I think that the conversation that you're talking about, David, the internal conversation of like, what good or bad am I doing for native country by making this character choice is like a huge part of, I think, native writers' room discussions. You know, like, what are we saying by having, you know, a character be an alcoholic or a character be, you know, XYZ, or like, you know, if every native character in this story is from a casino tribe and they talk about like per caps or whatever, then non-natives are gonna think that like all natives get per caps and have casino tribes and are in a casino tribe. And that's a very low, you know, top 1% native problem and not an every tribe problem. So I think that, you know, it is just one of those things where like when you tell, at least for me, upon telling native stories, I'm aware that like any non-natives reading it statistically probably don't know much about natives other than we maybe existed some point and then we disappeared like force ghosts to give the country to America, you know. So like that didn't actually happen. We're still here. And I think, you know, I think that that's just like part of it is like being aware that like you are starting at like kind of an English, like below English 101 level of explaining native stuff to people. So it's like, how do you tell a story that like feels authentically native without being too explainy, while also hopefully like giving some context to people about, you know, things, while also hopefully having all the characters be interesting and cool. And I think that that's like, you know, it's just like, it's the dance a little bit. And, you know, but I think it is something that hopefully is going through the mind of most native folks writing stuff, you know?
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on that and say that I've got nothing against. I think you can write a native character that has a problem with alcohol or some other substance if you do it in a right, a non-stereotypical way. I just decided
Yeah.
at the beginning of this project that I'm just not going to go down that road. I mean, I think it can be done, but on the other hand, if you show, I mean, like an example is, so I'm from the Rosebud Reservation. My people are, and right next to us, the Pine Ridge Reservation. So whenever a TV crew comes to Pine Ridge, instead of showing like little kids learning the Lakota language or doing something, they always go to this town called White Clay, which is, it is where all the alcohol comes from. They've shut it down since then, and they'll just do like poverty porn, just like showing all these drunk Indians and just sadness, and it's just this tale of sadness. And I just wasn't going to go down that road. I think there's a way to do it authentically and respectfully, but I just decided to completely avoid that path altogether.
But I think it's also like I agree with that. I think that's definitely like something that I wrestle with a lot. Is like whenever I write stuff that takes place on a res, like I grew up on I'm Cowlitz, but I grew up on the Tulalip res, which is also Washington State, and it's like I grew up in essentially what was like a lower middle class suburb. It's like there were cul-de-sacs. I lived in a 2-story house. Like it's not. It's I think I always try to, whenever I write things on reservations, I try to like not focus on poverty, poor stuff or anything like that, because like that's kind of all people see. And it's also like, I don't know, I always kind of go back to like if I was like still like a native teenager growing up on a reservation, and like the only way that I saw native culture represented was through poverty porn, that would make me feel like garbage. And it's like that definitely ties into, I think, why native suicide rates are the highest of any ethnicity, why alcoholism is a stereotype among natives, why like native high school graduation and college enrollment is like the lowest of any ethnicity. And I think that it's just like like doing what you can to like within these stories have some aspect of positive representation. That way like people can hopefully see themselves in those characters and see like pathways that aren't the stereotype.
I think on the flip side of that, something that I thought was interesting in the book is that, there are a lot of we have a lot of like bad guys. We have a lot, and we think you're reading it and you think like this is who we're chasing, and then you sort of swerve and we're chasing someone else, and it's super like, it adds to like the page turnery kind of, aspect of the book. But, ultimately the villain is another native character. And I thought that was such a, like, this is cool is the wrong word, but like, I feel like this sort of self-conscious decision would be to make a white person the villain. You know what I mean? So it's like, so they don't think that we, because you sometimes feel like you have to sort of like overcorrect. Like we can't talk about the things in our community that are bad that maybe we're contributing to, because then white people will take that and run and assume it's all of us, even though we can have nuanced conversations about us and our communities and all of that. I mean, it's something I think about constantly. And I think there was something really like brave about, that being the person who ultimately was sort of responsible for the destruction, because it felt sort of authentic, because that's the way communities work. You know what I mean? It's like not everyone in any community is a good person, but also it wasn't thinking like, oh, I need to give white people an ending where they can like learn a lesson at the end of it.
Well, thank you. That was a conscious decision to show that people on the Rosebud Reservation, they're good, they're bad, they're in between, they're human, they're complicated. There are super bad people on my nation that take advantage of our people, that are evil, that do bad things. There are wonderful, saintly people. And then there are people like all of us that, we do our best, we struggle. And so I tried really hard to give an authentic and real life representation, and not go into either the stereotypes on either side. So thank you so much for acknowledging that. I think you might be like the first one. I've talked to a lot of journalists. No one has ever picked up on that. Thank you.
Oh no, I mean, it's what I like about it is it's the difference that I so frequently feel like I'm talking with people about in Hollywood, where when we tell our stories, that's the result. It's like full characters and human beings, and not having to, feel like it's an after school special. Like that's the result of us getting to tell the stories that we want to tell without constantly worrying about white people or any of that. Like I think you know, and it's the way that like race is important when it's important. And I think if I'm watching something, I can tell when white people have decided something, because it's like, why are we talking about this now? Or like, why are two Black people explaining police brutality to each other? It's like, we already know that. We don't, you know, like we don't have to explain it to each other. And it's, to me, it felt like one of those, a moment of like, oh, this is like an authentic story by someone who is telling the story that they want to tell. And like, I want to see all, it's like, you know, I feel like with women, you know, people get very afraid about like women look, you know, like this sort of people wanting to make like empowered movies. And it's like, well, she does something bad. I'm like, some women are terrible. Like, it's fine. And that's equality. It's like when we can see everyone.
I just wanted to chime in on the choosing to have a native villain and a native protagonist. I thought that the choice was like extremely earned. Just speaking as speaking as like a lighter skinned native, growing up on a reservation, going to tribal schools. Like I definitely faced racism for like white folks, but I like got beat up for being the wrong kind of native for like Tulalip folks. And it's like I definitely, and like I feel like that's not uncommon experience. And I think that that's like, it's just like a cultural nuance thing that like I read that and like 100% got like Virgil's character decision as to our decision as to why he was the way he was and how he was wrestling with that. It's like, I think that that's just something that like, it's, you know, it's like that wouldn't be there if he was like a white villain who was a rich land developer or whatever. And then also like, you know, having, I mean, yeah, I don't want to spoil too much if anybody hasn't seen it, but it's like having multiple people.
Spoil the book.
Okay, but like, you know, it's like having like the tribal councilman who like maybe wasn't what he seemed, and it's like I think that these are all just like, it's like a nuance that like I feel like can only exist in native stories with native characters, and it's like nobody is and it's also like you did a really good job of humanizing everybody, so nobody was like the mustache twirling villain. You kind of like got the reasoning behind why everybody was the way that they were, and it all just felt like very, you know, it's like you kind of got like, it's just like different philosophies on nativeness and like how people could do right by themselves and stuff.
Well, thank you. You know, look, again, Native folks are, you know, this book has hopefully a little bit of something for everybody. You know, I talk with a lot of crime fiction people, and they're always like caught up in the plot and, oh, you did this and you did that, and that's an homage to the noir writer Jim Thompson. I'm like, yeah, you know. And then some people just love the you know the humor in it, and some people love the characters and the story. And Native folks will pick up on, oh, you called out James Luna and Bethany Yellowtail, and you are the first person to note that, yeah, there is colorism and color discrimination on reservations. And I felt that I had to bring it in there. I'm obviously lighter skinned. I'm an enrolled citizen of my nation. I grew up in Denver. I'd spend summers on the reservation where I would get the crap pounded out of me by some of the kids that they thought I was fabulously wealthy because I was from the city, which was hilarious because I came from the poorest neighborhood in all of Denver. Where I grew up, it was like it's literally the most polluted zip code in the entire United States. I grew up by a dog food factory and stockyards, you know, but the native kids on the res thought I was fabulously wealthy and would just pound me. So one of the bad guys in there, Rick Crow, you know, I named it after him. There's actually a Rick kid that beat me up, and I carried that around for a long time. So, haha, now I got you. You know,
wow.
Finally, decades later.
Spoiler. I mean, not to spoil things too much, but the way that things ended up happening for Rick Crow. Oh, you must have really hated that guy. But it's like, but it is that thing where like, you know, and like I think that you did a really good, and like this is something that I've, you know, just like rectified with myself, and you know, over the years of being an adult, of like, oh, you know, there's like a lot of trauma for like the kids at the tribal schools, and you know, like, and they needed an outlet of somebody to take it out on, and it's like, it sucks that it was me, but like I also like, you know, like I'm not as upset with them as I am the system for creating blah, you know. And I think that you did a really good job of like not making Rick Crow into like a villain. It's like you kind of got like, oh, he had things going on for his life that like made him into this, and like Virgil also understood that as a character, but also this guy was mean to me, you know, like, so yeah, just I can't glow enough about it. It's great.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about Maurice Shortbear, who is, you know, I'm always desperately craving love stories particularly between two people of color. And I'm like, I don't, because I feel like also Hollywood forgets that an interracial relationship doesn't have to involve a white person. It's like you could have like a Black man and an Asian woman, that's an interracial love story, but they always feel like a white person has to be involved. But
I hope that there's one exec that's watching this. It's just like, oh, taking notes. Okay,
listen,
Black, Asian.
A lot of free helpful information here. But to have these two characters, and I also feel like, I loved that how much she just like loved her community and like wanted to help. Like I think I feel like it's the thing you care about these people and you want to do the best for them. And I really appreciate that. But just, their kind of love story that wasn't, she didn't get raped or she didn't get, it wasn't something horrific that happened to them. It was like two people who had dated, kind of trying to figure shit out at the background of a bunch of other wild things happening and just sort of trying to support each other. And I was also so thankful that the native chef character was not, I was like, no, not like when I was really worried he was going to be bad.
I just want to have the smallest chime in. I think it's very funny that you made Lac Muckleshoot. I'm Pacific Northwest, like coastal Salish, and like Muckleshoot it's like also Washington State. And like, I think that there is, I don't know, like, what were you saying about making him so boisterous? What were you saying about Pacific Northwest tribes? Let's get into that.
My aunt works for the Muckleshoot tribe.
So honestly, I'll give some backstory here. I've never revealed this anywhere. Originally, Lac was going to be Cowlitz as a tribute to my friend Alyssa Washuta. Do you know Alyssa at all?
Oh, actually, yeah. We're okay. We're getting real native. So we follow each other on Twitter, and then I think that like I saw that she was a Cowlitz writer, and I think that it's me and her are the two Cowlitz writers. We followed each other on Twitter. I sent her a DM that was just like, "Sup, cousin," because we're both Cowlitz. And then we like figured out that like we might actually be cousins.
What?
So sort of like we're from the same band. It's from the same band of Cowlitz. So it's like, oh, so now I just call her cousin over Twitter DM just earnestly, and it's just like, yeah, how's it going, cousin? So yeah, Alyssa's great. I haven't met her in person, but we're probably related.
She's super cool. Alyssa's super cool. So I was gonna, so he for many versions of the book was Cowlitz. But I'm like, maybe I'm going to piss off Alyssa, So honestly, like at the last minute, I just kind of pulled in and made him Muckleshoot. But so just a random, again, I've never had this with any of the interviews I've given. But thank you so much, Kara, for the great thoughts on Marie Shortbear, who I struggled to write her character more than any other character because I wanted to give her a fullness, what we call in the writing world. I wanted her to be a round character, really fully developed with her own flaws and strengths. She wants to be a doctor, a Western doctor, but she wants to incorporate traditional indigenous medicine and healing, but she's getting pressure from her parents. She's not poor. She's actually fairly wealthy. She feels guilty about buying expensive clothes. I wanted her to be, human like all of us, just filled with contradictions and joys and yearnings and faults. And again, I don't want to give too much away in the book, but I felt there was a dramatic ending that she needed to kind of take the final step, which I won't give away here. I will reveal to you guys that in the sequel, Marie is going to run for tribal council. So So she is going to try to atone for the sins of certain people here that I won't again give away. And so she's going to run for tribal council. So I'm deeply in the middle of outlining the narrative arcs for book 2. So I love Marie. I struggled to find her voice, but once I got it, it was like, yes. And thank you so much for the kind words.
Well, I guess that what I really appreciated about Marie is like, I feel like there is I hate to say that it's a trope more as just a themes that I see in people that I know in Native country, in that like, I'm friends with Lucas Brown Eyes, who's I think also from the Pine Ridge Reservation, and like he talks about this a lot, where it's just like a lot of Native cultures are very matriarchal. The women traditionally take the lead, and like I think that that's something that you see so much in Native country, and that like I can name so many just like badass Native women who are like doing really great things and doing exactly what I see Marie doing, where it's just kind of like, how can you take like traditional teachings and things like that and marry them with the modern world? And like, I just really appreciated that, like, once again, like only a native writer would like get that that's a thing. And I think that you just really nailed like, it's like people like, Crystal Echo Hawk from Illuminative, Bethany Yellowtail, like people who were like Bethany, she's a great fashion designer everybody should check out, but she also like her goal is to bring manufacturing to her reservation, to bring jobs to her reservation. So while she's creating like just amazing fashion that, you're seeing on red carpets all over the place, it's like her goal with that is to, how can she use her position to like do right by her people? And like Sterling Harjo is another native TV writer who like sold a show, and he was like, the show needs to be produced in Oklahoma, where he's from and where his people are from. And I think that, I just really appreciated that's what Marie was,
You also allowed for new, I think men often, when they're giving female characters nuance, they give them a trauma. Like that's their immediate, they're just like, that's how she's interesting. Something horrific has happened to this woman. And that's the only way they can sort of conceive of making women interesting to them. And so I think like I find it difficult with just, a lot of things that I'm even, I'm like reading, I'm like, this is going so well. And then something happens and I'm like, oh, like we're interesting without that, and I think that's what I think it's maybe a little bit more effort and a little bit more work, and it's thinking about it for a little bit longer, and it's maybe work that everyone wants to do, but it's what I did really appreciate about her was like, oh, this is a full, interesting person. And, ultimately there's some traumatic things that do sort of go down, but it's not the root of why she's interesting.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, it took me a while to get into her. There's one little character detail in there that when she was in elementary school, she used to put on plastic wolf ears and howl in class. So that came from my kid. Now he didn't do it. He told me a story. So David Jr., who is, by the way, the model for the Nathan character in the book. So to get into kind of the head of a 14-year-old, my son is 15 now. I kind of used him and his speech styles and everything. But he told me about this girl at his school that would slap on wolf ears and howl during class. And I just love that so much that I had to incorporate that into Marie's background. So thank you, David Jr. Not that he's all he does is play video games. I love my kid. But yeah, if it ever becomes a movie or TV show, he'll watch it. But that's
then he'll be impressed.
I also really appreciated the Wolf Girl specifics, just because like that's who a lot of my friends were in high school. It's just like, I don't know. It's they're all delightful people.
I want to ask you about sort of the importance. I think part of it is the genre. It's a mystery, it's a thriller, it's crime, it's all of that. And there are certain things that we kind of expect out of the genre, but I really like the fact that, spoiler, whatever, the importance of justice being found to some degree, I think was really satisfying. I think and I think it was more satisfying because it's also, in a location and a group of people who just, we can't even talk about the degree of injustice. It's so frequently justice is not served. And so to me, it was even, that win was just even more satisfying. It was like, oh, like something. And so I just, just your thoughts on that, or if there was a world where justice wasn't served, because I really, I was really appreciative of it.
Well, thank you. So in this book is being marketed by my publisher, Echo HarperCollins, as a crime book. And I'm fine with that. I think it is a crime book. I think a crime fiction fan is going to come in and they're going to like it. It hits sort of the standard, framework of a crime book, but I also kind of rebelled against that. And, so I wanted there to be a satisfying ending, but I wanted that satisfying ending to be somewhat ambiguous. And also stylistically, I tried to build in some things that are different than most crime books. So there is an element of surrealism in there. He has some visions, obviously, in literature, magical realism. And I'm trying to kind of create a style of indigenous crime fiction that takes the standard crime fiction model, but makes it hopefully uniquely indigenous. And I don't pretend to pioneer this. My buddy, Stephen Graham Jones, who is a wonderful indigenous horror writer. His book is blowing up right now, The Only Good Indians.
Mm-hmm. Everybody read it. It's great.
It's fantastic. Yeah. But he wrote a crime book about 20 years ago that really changed my life called All the Beautiful Sinners. And that book is filled with surrealism and craziness, and even Mr. Rogers from the kids show pops up in there, and I'm like, what? And so I trace a lot of what I have tried to do in this book, building upon what Stephen Graham Jones and earlier in the 90s, a native writer called Lewis Owens. So I tried to work within the crime fiction genre and give a satisfying ending where justice is served in a sense, but at the same time, there's not complete justice. The people on the res are still beset by, unfortunately, terrible criminal justice procedures, healthcare issues, food issues. So I'm trying to work within the framework, but again, create something, uniquely native. So.
On that note, I had a question about, or a question/discussion I wanted to kind of like throw at you, David, and just see what you thought about it.
Sure.
I feel like most native works that I read and most native stories that I see that are told by natives, there is an aspect of the story that is about it's like the traditional, deciding between the traditional and the modern day. I think that's something, if you name a native book, I feel like there is some aspect of that. And it's something you definitely see in Winter Counts with, a lot of like Virgil's struggles of like, is he going to, like do the traditional stuff, or is he going to just kind of like, assimilate's not the right word, but you know what I'm talking about. Just like, decide to like cast off the traditional stuff and just assume that that's kind of the old ways. And I guess I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. If that's a theme that you feel is common in native literature, is that something that you were aware of when you were telling this story, and just how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so a lot of traditional native works, do I think work within what you're talking about here. Some of the greatest native works are historical fiction. They're set back like 100 years ago. I knew that was not the book that I wanted to write. I wanted to write something present day, real, current, crackling. That's what I wanted to write. I love those books, but that's not what I wanted to write. Now, within the tradition of the current day, the question is how the issue. You said it's not assimilation, but I think it is. I struggle with this. So I'm a dad. I'm raising two kids. I live in a suburb of Denver, Colorado. I'm trying to raise them with some awareness of their native traditions. We go back to the res once, a couple times a year. They hate it. They're like, oh, I don't want to go, Dad. I want to be with my friends and all that. It is a struggle to hang on to your culture in the city. And even though the book is mainly set on the res, Virgil is struggling internally with how much do I embrace these traditions and how much do I reject them? And so, in the end, I don't want to give away too much. He has an epiphany and a resolution. And
which was just real talk. I teared up reading that. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Well, so he does embrace his traditions at the end. I guess, you could guess that if you haven't read the book, and that was important to me because I do think native traditions and native culture are so important for native people to hang on to, while adapting them to the modern world. So that was an important point to me. And there is some aspects of native spirituality in the book. I've gotten emails from 3 or 4 people. One young lady sent me a video. She's crying and she's saying, after reading your book, I've now returned to Lakota spirituality. I'm now going to do Sundance. I'm going to do this. She's like, your book really changed my life. And I started crying, okay? Because it was like just amazing that what I had hoped to happen did in fact happen. And so I made a conscious decision to portray our culture and our spirituality in a positive sense. So thank you for catching it.
Yeah, it was not to parse words. It was incredible. It was just very well written and it really emotionally affected me too.
Thank you.
So we have to wrap up soon, but David, I have to ask you.
Yeah.
The cattle prod. I mean.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
I mean, my God.
Yeah, I out loud muttered.
Where did that come from?
I don't know exactly. So about 2 years ago, in July of 2018, I'm trying to find an ending for this book. And I'm just struggling. So I'm at an artist residency in New Hampshire called the McDowell Colony. And I'm just struggling. There are filmmakers there, poets, artists, writers, documentary people, no comedians. They should include that,
Nah, we're a waste of time.
and I'm just struggling, to find an ending that works. And I'm playing pool with this pretty famous poet one night, and he puts on some really bleak music. And I just, the image just comes into my head of a cattle prod. And I went and I stayed up, from like midnight till 7 a.m. just writing like I was on fire, And again, I don't want to give away too much, but imagine the worst possible thing that could happen with a cattle prod. That's pretty much what happened. So it just came to me like in a vision. It was like a moment of light, and it's like, yes, this is how it has to end. And so I wrote it straight through 50 pages in one night. So
nice.
I don't know where that came from.
It was quite the ending.
Yeah, I definitely muttered to myself while reading it, oh, Jesus effing Christ. Like, in a good way. I was just like, wow, that was some stuff happened there.
It was real. I also was really like visualizing it, and
yeah,
I was like, I see this happening like fully in my brain. I'm watching it play out.
It was also just such a, I mean, like, once again, not to spoil anything, but like it was so cathartic. The character on the holding end of the cattle prod, it was just like such a cathartic and earned, like I was cheering that character got that. Like,
yeah, well,
this
obviously
person that like deeply affected somebody that they care about, like.
Yeah, I agree. And originally I was going to end the book there, but I felt that was just a little bit too dark of an ending. So I added the epilogue where obviously there's sort of some closure, where there's it kind of comes around for full circle, the story, hopefully. And I really felt that ended the book, hopefully, on the correct note, where Virgil and Nathan sort of accept what they've been rejecting. And I felt that was sort of the right, hopeful note to end the tale on.
So my last question is for both of you. I think one, David, we were wondering if there was going to be a sequel, and I love that has been answered. But in this, I definitely don't want to give too much like credit to white people or act like things have changed that much. But in a landscape that's maybe shifting a bit, I'm just wondering what both of you are kind of interested in creatively. If we're sort of assuming that this, perhaps we're ushering in a time of, increased storytelling and voices, and hopefully stopping things like Cough Cough Lovecraft Country. Just sort of.
Oh, we can have a whole new podcast just talking about. We should maybe over the Twitter DMs we'll have a conversation about that.
Oh my God. But just sort of where you're hoping to go with your art.
Well, I'll go first, and just, I know we're wrapping up here. I just want to say, I went to both of your websites. You guys are doing such great work. I'm just so honored, to be here. Joey, I saw your video. I think my kids heard me laughing down the hallway about the bear. Don't tell a bear. If y'all don't know, go to the website. It's hilarious. So, but let me use that to kind of jump on. I think we're at an interesting point in this country where people of color and marginalized voices overall are being, hopefully, to some degree, brought back into the conversation. My buddy Tommy Orange is blowing up. His book is doing great, and movie, TV series. There's lots of great stuff happening.
There. I mean, everyone on this, it's stunning and incredible.
It's fantastic. Tommy's one of the good ones. He's a great guy. My buddy Stephen Graham Jones. I mean, I could go on and on, but I think, but it's not just writers. I mean, I think Joey, you and I, and all of us probably know a lot of the same people. Sterling Harjo and others. They're doing amazing stuff. I do think we're at sort of a moment where these communities are coming together. It used to be that there was just like one native writer, there was like one person, one native this, one native that. I think now, hopefully, there's a multiplicity of folks that we can come together and go beyond our own communities. So I'm really hopeful, not politically, but artistically, I'm really hopeful.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I think that there are, I moved to Los Angeles in 2010, so I've been, in the entertainment industry for about 10 years. And I really do feel like things have been bubbling up over the past couple of years, and we're starting to kind of finally get some representation in the media. Native people, even though there are around 6 million Native people on the U.S. Census, which is similar in population size to the Jewish American population and the Chinese American population, we're referred to as an invisible minority because you very rarely see us on TV, in movies, and in media outside of like racist Native sports mascots. And I think that people are finally starting to get that through the work of, we're definitely standing on the backs of a lot of great people who've been doing this work for a long time. But, you know, I mean, like I've got a thread on Twitter where I basically am saying like 2020 is the year that Native stories are going to break through in the media. And then I just post whenever a cool thing happens, an example. And it's been, it's been really great to track that. And like right now there are 3 Native television shows by 3 Native showrunners written largely by Native writers' rooms in development. There's Rutherford Falls from Sierra Ornalis. That's going to be on Peacock. Sterling Harjo's got Reservation Dogs, which is on FX. And there's a 3rd show that hasn't been announced yet, but it's going to be super cool. And, I think like when I talk to executives and when I like have, meetings in Hollywood and when I like have conversations with people, I feel like at first, when I first moved here, I would get the questions that we talked about earlier, where it's just like, hey, my hometown sounds Native. Is that a Native word? And I'm like, real question I got from an exec last year. But I feel like, and I'm like,
was it?
I mean, this dude grew up in the middle of the country, and I grew up in Western Washington, so I don't know. It's like that's like not my tribe's. I mean, probably, but I don't know. So like, I feel like questions like that are becoming a rarity, and more often than that, I'm getting questions of people earnestly wanting to hear not just my stories, but other great Native writer stories. Also, like, you were saying that like, there's a multiplicity of Native creatives. I feel like that's something that I try to do kind of in my own work, is like lead with abundance. Like I'm working with Illuminative, which is a really great Native run organization, to release a list of 25 Native American comedians you should follow in 2020. It's going to be online in the next week or so. And like, that's like 25 super funny Native comedians that are ready for late night shows, ready for writers' rooms, and et cetera. I'm meeting with execs that want lists of, Native animation writers, Native, cool Native actors, blah, blah, et cetera. And like, I think that, it's like, there's not a huge amount of us in Hollywood, but there's enough great storytellers out there that are finally getting their due and are finally getting noticed and finally getting the ability to tell their stories. And like, it's just, like genuinely a joy to see. And it makes me very hopeful for the future of just like Native representation and Native storytelling. Plus the Washington DC NFL team changed the name finally. That's big. Yeah.
I mean,
and it's also like people are not to prattle on too much longer. Also, people are like, I'm noticing more outrage when people get things wrong. Cough, Lovecraft Country, cough. So like, it's like people like, it's no longer a situation where something happens and then just like native like text chains are loud about it. It's like non-natives are also acknowledging, oh, that's kind of effed up. So like, people are getting aware, and it's amazing to see. And fingers crossed it continues.
I mean, I think one of the ways that, that sort of reaction of recognizing things is wrong is the result of people engaging with people unlike them and art and things like that. So like, as a nice return to full circle, counts. I feel like everyone who's so far been watching this has read it, but if you haven't, it's so good. David, where can we find you?
Sure. So my website is davidweiden.com, DavidWeiden, and that's where I've got my Instagram links, Twitter links, all that. I'm just happy to connect with folks, and I love to spread the word about other good folks. So please, anybody watching, come follow me and let me know if you're doing good stuff, because, we will spread the word.
Joey, what about you?
Follow me on Twitter at Joeytainment. Follow me on Instagram at Joey Clift. My website's joeyclift.com. If you want to, check out that Illuminative list, definitely follow me on Twitter. I'll post about it in a week or two when it's up. And then, I just want to say, like, I just want to shout out David even more to say that, like, I really feel like this book and this character is going to be, like, probably the next big pop culture thing as a TV show or a movie in the not too distant future. So like, if you want to be one of those people that's just like, the book was better, or like I read the book when it came out, as a means to like dunk on people who are just discovering this amazing character in this amazing world when the TV show comes out in a couple of years or whatever, read it now, because it's great, and support David's work. And I personally can't wait for the sequel. And so follow me, but also just like buy David's stuff.
I love that. David, Heska, Wanbli, Weiden, Joey Clift. Thank you guys so much for being here. This was like one of my favorite combos, and hopefully there'll be more in the future.
Yeah, thanks for putting
you guys. Thank you. Thank everybody who's read it, and thank you both. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Yeah,
everyone.